I have been working as a pediatrician at Boston Children's Hospital for 8 years. Every day, I face the harsh reality of children's lives. As I walk through the hospital corridors, I always wear a simple round-neck dress under my white coat, aiming for a modest yet neat appearance. Another incredible surgery, Dr. Wilson. Every time my colleagues greet me like this, I feel a little embarrassed. After all, my daily life as Mrs. Wilson is far from glamorous. Working at a hospital affiliated with Harvard Medical School is a source of pride for me, but for my mother-in-law, it's worthless. How dare a woman of such low class marry my son? Of course, my mother-in-law would never say those words in public. She is known as a great philanthropist, a devout Christian, a pillar of Trinity Church in Boston, and a prominent figure in Boston's high society. She always sits in the front row at Sunday services, her luxurious Cartier cross necklace gleaming on her chest, the perfect portrait of a high-class lady. But her public image and her true face are like two completely different people. We live in an exclusive Boston neighborhood. The 12,000-square-foot mansion is nothing like the middle-class home where I grew up. This season, the enormous garden, designed by professional landscapers, is adorned with lilacs and hydrangeas. Inside, antique furniture fills the rooms, and a huge Italian chandelier hangs overhead, something that still makes me feel out of place. My husband, Michael, is an executive at a Silicon Valley startup. With his MBA from Harvard, he has been recognized for his business talent and has quickly climbed the corporate ladder. Tall, handsome, and always impeccable in his Brooks Brothers suits, he is the image of a successful entrepreneur. Jennifer, meeting you was the greatest treasure of my life, my husband says sweetly, his Tiffany wedding ring shining on my left hand, proof of his love. But in front of his mother, he becomes another person, unusually quiet. Our 6-year-old son Ethan is in first grade at a private school. In his Brooks Brothers uniform, his cheerful and honest personality has made him very popular among the other children. Every day, I feel happiness as a mother watching him enjoy breakfast prepared with organic ingredients from Whole Foods. However, lately, I've noticed him acting strange, as if he tenses up when he's around his grandmother. "Mom, we have to go to Grandma's." I should have been more sensitive to those words. As a pediatrician, I should have noticed even the slightest change in my son. Now regret consumes me. My parents are worried about the situation. My dad, Robert, is one of the most influential lawyers in the state, and my mom, Catherine, is involved in charity work as a prominent figure within the church. Both have long realized the vast difference between Margaret's public and private image. They haven't missed the subtle changes in her attitude during dinners at the country club and charity events. "Jennifer, I will always support you and your son," my mom said, gently taking my hand during lunch at the Capitol Grill. It all started to change one Monday at the end of May. Michael went on a business trip to Silicon Valley for a medical conference. The next day, I had to leave Ethan with my mother-in-law. "Don't worry, I'll take care of Ethan," Margaret said with an elegant smile. I had no reason to doubt her. Under the soft light of the early summer sun streaming through the window, Margaret, dressed in an exclusive Oscar de la Renta dress, looked almost saintly. It was a quiet afternoon with a light breeze carrying the scent of lilacs from the garden. After my 36-hour shift, I walked wearily toward the Wilson mansion. The May sun shone brightly, and as I passed through the garden, filled with the sweet aroma of hydrangeas, I felt something was wrong. I didn't hear Ethan's energetic voice, the sound of the gardener working, or the coming and going of the maid. All the usual noises had disappeared. I took off my flats and entered the mansion. Beyond the heavy front door, the same elegant space as always stretched before me: Italian marble floors, French antique furniture, and the chandelier illuminating the room. But this silence was strange. "Mom, I'm here," called out. My voice echoed hollowly. No answer. This isn't normal. It's never this quiet. My pediatrician's instinct screamed that something was very wrong. My heart began to beat faster, and my palms became damp with cold sweat. The living room was empty. I only noticed an expensive porcelain cup, half full, abandoned on the table. Beside it, Margaret's scarf was carelessly placed. "Ethan, where are you?" I ran upstairs, my footsteps echoing on the marble. I checked the master bedroom, Ethan's room, the study. There were no signs of anyone. Not even the toys that were always scattered on the white carpet were in sight. Then I heard a faint sob that chilled me to the bone. I held my breath and strained my ears, trying to locate where the sound was coming from. It seemed to be coming from the backyard. I pushed open the large French doors and went out into the perfectly manicured garden. The spring light was still shining, and the sweet scent of roses floated in the air. But somehow a sinister feeling made my skin crawl. And then I froze in front of the doghouse in the corner of the yard. I saw Ethan's Brooks Brothers uniform. It was covered in mud and torn in places. Around it, dog food was scattered as if someone had purposely thrown it there. Inside the small doghouse, my son was trembling. "Ethan, what happened?" I ran towards him, ready to hug him, but for the first time in his life, he pulled away from my arms. "Mom!" His lips were pale and trembling, his eyes swollen from crying so much. "Grandma said I'm not family." His trembling little hand pointed to his own arm. The skin still had marks as if it had been tied with a rope. I've seen many scars in my medical career, but seeing them on my own son's body churned my stomach. "She said I should live outside like a dog." Ethan's voice cracked. At his feet there was an old worn dog bowl. Inside there was undoubtedly dog food. I wanted water, but Grandma turned off the faucet. Something inside my head snapped. I entered the mansion, my blood boiling. There was Margaret in the living room, sipping tea elegantly. She was wearing a Carolina Herrera dress, sitting upright with her expensive baccarat teacup in hand, the very image of royalty. The afternoon light coming through the window made the diamond on her ring sparkle. "Welcome back," she said calmly. "I prepared a suitable home for your son." Even her tone had a hint of pride. With my voice trembling with rage, I could barely ask her, "Why would you do such a horrible thing?" Margaret put down her teacup with all the calmness in the world and gave me a perfect smile, the same one she used when asking for donations at church charity events. Members of lower-class families deserve the treatment they deserve. Her expression changed. She looked me up and down, noticing my cheap round-neck dress, and so the story continues with the ensuing legal and social repercussions, the family's rebuilding, and Margaret's downfall. The text provided is quite long, and I've translated a significant portion of it. Please let me know if you'd like me to continue translating the rest. My parents were at my house. Stars were already shining in the night sky. In the study of that imposing colonial mansion, worthy of a distinguished family for generations, my father, Robert, held some photographs in his trembling hand. "This is child abuse." His voice, the same one belonging to the most influential lawyer in the state, sounded strangely unsteady. My mother, Catherine, was hugging Ethan. Tears continued to stream down my face. My mother's silk blouse was soaked, but she didn't seem to care. "First, let's secure the evidence," my father said, regaining his composure as a lawyer and beginning to take action. "I have photos and videos I took," I said, holding out my phone. I had meticulously documented everything. The doghouse, the scattered dog food, the marks on Ethan's arms. I hadn't missed a single detail. "We also need a diagnosis from the emergency medical team," my father continued as he took notes. "Jennifer, as a doctor, please record your son's condition accurately." My mother was already making phone calls. Her connections as a pillar of Trinity Church in Boston reached every corner of Boston's high society. "About tomorrow's benefit breakfast." Her voice lacked its usual softness. "I'll need to make some changes to the plans." After treating Ethan's wounds, I sat down at my computer. I took a deep breath and tried to compose myself as a doctor. I wrote my son's medical report. Abrasions on the skin, mild dehydration, psychological trauma. Seeing those medical terms reflected on the screen almost made me cry again. Just then the butler announced a visitor. "Mr. James from the Massachusetts Department of Children and Families is here." He was a veteran member of the office and an old friend of my father's. Despite his calm expression, there was an intensity in his gaze. "This is clearly an emergency," he said firmly. "We will begin the investigation immediately." However, my father shook his head slightly. "We will proceed with legal measures carefully, but for someone like Margaret, that alone is not enough." My mother nodded with a serene expression. "Tomorrow, more than 500 people from Boston's elite will be gathered at the church's annual benefit breakfast. It's the most important social event of the year for Margaret, her time to shine as the great philanthropist. My father understood immediately. We need both direct legal action and social sanctions. That night, we devised a detailed plan. Press materials for the major local media, strategies to spread the information on social networks, and a presentation with key photographic evidence. Already in the early morning, while computer experts were finalizing the presentation materials, my mother's phone wouldn't stop ringing. Her voice spread throughout Boston, reaching influential women in every corner of the city. Everything is ready. When my father announced that, we knew we had a perfect plan. At 8 a.m., the hall of Trinity Church in Boston was filled with the most glamorous members of Boston high society, dressed in designer clothes, sparkling jewelry, and elegant smiles, unaware of the scandal that was about to erupt. Women draped in Chanel and Herrera paraded elegantly, while men looked impeccable in the latest Brooks Brothers suits. Among them, Margaret made her entrance with the same grace as always, her expression serene, without a single shadow of concern. "Let's begin this year's charity event," my mother announced from the podium. Suddenly, the large screen in the hall came to life, projecting shocking images. Ethan trembling next to the doghouse, the scattered dog food, the marks on his small arms, and the decisive photo capturing Margaret's cruel smile. The entire hall froze. "This is what my grandson suffered yesterday." My mother's voice resonated, cold and sharp as a razor. "This is the true face of Margaret Wilson, the supposed philanthropist." A murmur of disbelief ran through the audience. But in a matter of seconds, the murmurs turned into voices of condemnation. Cell phone cameras pointed at the screen. One after another, social networks exploded. There was no turning back. At that moment, the doors of the hall burst open, and the main local media stormed into the room. They were reporters strategically summoned in advance. Camera flashes went off in Margaret's face, who instantly paled. Her perfect makeup began to crumble along with her impeccable facade. Meanwhile, on the 47th floor of a skyscraper in Silicon Valley, Michael Wilson was in the middle of presenting a $1 billion deal. Dressed in an exclusive Brooks Brothers suit, and with his Apple Watch marking every minute, he moved confidently through his slides. "The strategic advantage of our company in this deal is..." His iPhone 15 Pro began to vibrate frantically in his pocket. Normally, he would have ignored the call, but this time he felt something different, a strange unease in his chest. He took out his phone, and the screen filled with unread notifications and messages, images after images. And then his world fell apart. "With this, we conclude today's presentation, Mr. Wilson." The Silicon Valley investors exchanged confused glances. What was going on? But Michael's expression had already changed. "What is more important, my son and my wife, or $1 billion?" The answer was clear. Without wasting a second, he left the conference room and ordered his private jet to be prepared. But before leaving, there was something he needed to do. On the other end of the phone, Margaret was trying to make excuses, her voice trembling and desperate. "I can explain. It's not what it seems." "Enough," Michael said coldly that same night. The most influential figures of the Wilson family and their legal advisors gathered in the imposing reception room of the Thompson mansion. "I propose the total revocation of the division of assets," announced the Wilson family lawyer. "Furthermore, all of Margaret's previous charitable activities and social contributions must be annulled." "No objections," Michael stated, his voice leaving no room for argument. Outside the window, the Boston skyline shone silently in the darkness. A maid walked elegantly among the heavy furniture of the reception room, carrying a bottle of Dom Perignon champagne. However, no one was in the mood for a toast. "We need to start a new life," Michael said, slowly taking Jennifer's hand. There was still a slight tremor in her grip. "Ethan's psychological therapy will also begin," announced the Thompson family's private doctor. "The best specialists at Boston Children's Hospital have already formed a team to help him." The next day, in the hospital's pediatric ward, Michael sat next to Jennifer, his voice trembling when he finally spoke. "Jennifer, I'm so sorry." A deep regret was reflected in his eyes, very different from the serene appearance he usually wore in Silicon Valley boardrooms. "It's my responsibility for not having seen my mother's true nature. For the first time in my life, I feel like I'm making a decision based on my own will." Jennifer gave him a slight smile. "It's okay, Michael. We still have a lot to do." In the hospital bed, Ethan slept soundly, his expression peaceful for the first time in days. "Treatment for post-traumatic stress disorder takes time," explained the attending physician. "But with the love of his family, he will surely recover." Hearing those words, Michael strengthened his resolve. "The first thing will be to sell the mansion in Boston," he announced firmly. Leaving behind the 12,000 square foot house and everything it represented was a necessary step. "Let's choose a new home together, the three of us." Then he made another important decision: to move his work base to Boston. The $1 billion deal in Silicon Valley was a thing of the past. "I want to value my time with my family. What more do I need?" But not only that, he finally wanted to establish an organization for the prevention of child abuse. "I need to turn this experience into hope for someone else." Jennifer nodded with determination. As a doctor, as a mother, and as a person, she also had a lot to do. While searching for a new home, the family stayed at the Four Seasons Hotel in Boston. From the presidential suite on the top floor, the cityscape stretched out before them, symbolizing a new beginning. That night, as Ethan was about to fall asleep, his little voice broke the silence. "Hey Mom, from now on do I have to see Grandma?" Jennifer was speechless for a moment. Then she stroked his hair and smiled sweetly. "No, my love. It's okay now." Ethan nodded with relief. "From now on we'll start a new life, the three of us," Jennifer whispered. "With Dad too," Ethan added with a small smile. "Yes, of course," she replied. Michael watched them silently, feeling for the first time in a long time that they were on the right path. At that moment, Michael truly understood, from the depths of his heart, what the most valuable investment of his life was. Outside the window, the Boston nightscape shone brightly. That light seemed to illuminate their new future. Meanwhile, Margaret's downfall had barely begun. But that's another story. The Wilson family's story was just beginning, moving steadily towards a new morning. A year later, in early summer, the bells of Trinity Church in Boston resonated in the tranquil morning air. But this time, Margaret Wilson wasn't there. The 12,000 square foot mansion that was once the symbol of her status in Boston's luxurious residential area now had new owners. The iconic Cartier cross necklace she had worn as a philanthropist was auctioned, and in an ironic twist of fate, the proceeds were donated to a child abuse prevention fund. Margaret now lived in a small apartment far from Boston. She had lost everything: her Oscar de la Renta and Carolina Herrera dresses, her antique furniture, and most importantly, her social prestige. Margaret Wilson. Oh, that woman from the child abuse scandal. Her former friends now frowned just hearing her name. Her days of charity events, church meetings, and exclusive country club memberships were over. Her phone, which once rang constantly with invitations and compliments, now remained absolutely silent. Meanwhile, the Wilson family's new life had begun in the Brookline area of Boston. Thank you for your patience. Let's begin today's presentation. Jennifer's voice resonated in the auditorium of Boston Children's Hospital. Detailed graphs and concrete strategies appeared on the screen. Early detection and prevention of child abuse, approaches from the medical field. Michael, sitting in the front row, watched with pride. His life in Silicon Valley was a thing of the past. Now he ran a venture capital fund specializing in children's well-being, based in Boston. Excellent presentation, Dr. Wilson. Warm applause filled the room. Among the attendees were high society women who had once been close to Margaret. It seemed their values had changed a lot in the last year. Jennifer smiled when she saw Ethan walk through the auditorium doors. He was still wearing his Brooks Brothers uniform, but his expression was completely different. There was no trace of the anxiety that had once tormented him. Life was just beginning for them. I went with Dad to the psychological counseling. Ethan was still in the process of recovery, but as the doctor had said, an environment surrounded by family love was undoubtedly healing his heart. Let's do something special for dinner tonight, Michael suggested. Jennifer and Ethan nodded instantly, but this time they wouldn't go to the Capitol Grill or any other luxurious restaurant. Instead, they chose a small Italian restaurant they had discovered together. Maybe the tablecloths weren't the finest, but the place had a genuine warmth, something no label could buy. That same day, at Trinity Church in Boston, the sermon revolved around forgiveness and atonement. True love is not found in social status or wealth, but in our daily actions, resonated the priest's voice from the pulpit. Among the congregation was Catherine Thompson, who had found a new purpose in her life. She now headed the church's Child Protection Committee, a change no one would have anticipated a year ago. That night, in their new home in Brookline, Jennifer checked her email and saw a message from an unknown sender. "Jennifer, I can't ask for forgiveness. I just want to acknowledge that you were right, and I was wrong." The message was from Margaret. Jennifer read the words silently but didn't reply. Instead, she turned off her computer and walked to her son's room. Ethan was already fast asleep, his face calm and serene. Jennifer let out a long, relieved sigh. Outside, the early summer night sky stretched out calmly, as beautiful as the one a year ago when everything happened. But now everything was different. From behind, Michael gently placed his hand on his wife's shoulder. "Are you happy?" he asked softly. Jennifer nodded with a smile. "Yes, I think we've finally become a real family, in the deepest sense." They no longer needed to surround themselves with luxury brands or the superficiality of high society. Now they had something much more valuable. And the next morning, as always, a new day was about to dawn in the city of Boston.